which is why I wrote an article in the Atlantic magazine about a year ago called, you've heard of the movie The 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe? The title of my article about after 7 years the husband starts getting an itch and fooling around. I think that's going to happen to the Chinese people on the mainland pretty soon. And so the title of my article was China's 70-Year Itch. And my point is that, first of all, there's a precedent for these revolutionary one-party regimes to start running out of steam around them. But second of all, and more importantly, China has been entering a dilemma for some time now that I think is going to become increasingly acute. And there's no permanent solution to this dilemma. I think they could buy a lot of time if they embarked on a process of political reform like what happened in Taiwan in the 1980s, but I don't see, and 90s, but I don't see any indication that China's rulers, beginning with Xi Jinping, who's the most powerful Chinese ruler, probably since Mao Zedong, I don't think there's any sign that he is planning to do this, is willing to do this, will tolerate a course of political reform. He's a very arrogant man. He's a very ambitious man. He's a kind of power-hungry man. He's concentrated power in the presidency and the leadership of the Communist Party of China more than any ruler since Mao, certainly more than Deng Xiaoping. And his crackdown on corruption, which has generated a lot of support for him for the moment in China, is very, very superficial. It's not really serious. Because any Chinese ruler who was serious about cracking down on corruption would say the inevitable, logical thing. You can't have a credible, sustainable crackdown on corruption without having an independent judiciary and independent prosecutors who will go after corruption without political permission, wherever it may lead. But he's not going to allow that because he fears that an independent judiciary could turn on the party, could turn on him. This man himself is not clean. He had to dump several $100 million in stocks when he assumed the presidency, and who knows where his wealth is scattered around the world now. In any case, the dilemma is that China, after what is it now, 25 years, really more, 30 years plus of extraordinary economic growth, 8 to 10% a year for a whole generation plus now, China has changed dramatically. First of all, it's achieved the biggest reduction and most rapid reductions in poverty in the history of the world. But second of all, people are much more educated, they're much more connected, they've got much more information. It's become a middle-class society. They're much more aware, they've got more information, and they've got higher expectations and much greater ability to protest. And it's true that the Chinese leadership is censoring and filtering the internet and all the different social media, Weibo and so on, much more systematically, with much more powerful technology than any regime anywhere else in the world. But still, there's so much activity happening all over China, so much communication, so much protest, that they can't control it all. And the problem is that with economic development, people's values change. Their mindset changes. You saw this happen in Taiwan. People come to want more autonomy. They want more control over their lives. They become more suspicious of government. They want more freedom. And with economic development, inevitably there emerges a stronger, what we call in the academic world, civil society. That is non-governmental organizations, social networks, independent media, and very crucially, it is dramatically underreported, but very crucially, the growth of religion. And it's not just Falun Gong. There's probably over 100 million Christians in China. It might be double that number. Many of them are worshiping, most of them in informal churches. Many of the services happen in homes where people are meeting like we're meeting now. They not only don't believe in communism anymore, that's already an old story, they're looking for something else to give their life meaning. And it can't just be about money. So all of this is an enormous threat to the Chinese Communist Party. And as a result of economic development and the change in society, 2 or 3 things have happened. Number one, as I said, there's more independent organization. There's more resources in society. Number 2, people's values have changed or are in the process of changing, let's put it this way. And number 3, people want a continuation of economic development. And if the regime doesn't deliver it, it's going to be in trouble. It's going to be in really serious political trouble. And this is the dilemma that Xi Jinping faces and for which he has no really sustainable answer. If he continues to deliver economic development, he's going to continue to change his society the way Taiwan changed over these last 40 or 50 years, where civil society emerged, more Taiwanese consciousness emerged, independent organization emerged, an underground political party emerged, and the raw material for democracy emerged. If the merry-go-round stops and he is no longer able to generate economic growth, we know it's not going to be at 8 to 10% a year. But if it falls below 6% or so, the Chinese Communist Party is going to be in extremely grave political difficulty. So if he keeps generating economic growth, he continues to drive modernization, value change, and the growth of civil society. If economic growth implodes, he's got massive legitimacy crisis. Now, why will this be a legitimacy crisis? You know, if economic growth stops in the United States, well, we had a very rough period from 2008 through maybe until a year or 2 ago, and for many people it's still going on, but nobody was calling for the end of the political system in the United States. But that's because in the United States, and if I may say so, in Taiwan, people believe in the political system. They believe in democracy. They value the political system for its own ends. In China, nobody believes in the political system anymore. Nobody believes in communism anymore. The party hack who gets up and lectures at a university on communist ideology is a joke. People fly paper airplanes, you know, they're looking at their social media, they're making jokes around. No one takes it seriously anymore. Many young people are joining the Communist Party these days in colleges. They're not joining because they believe in communism. They're joining because if you're a party member, you're going to get a better job. You're going to have more connections. You do more business. That's the only reason to join the Communist Party. And the Communist Party knows it. So you can't maintain the legitimacy of communist rule with communist ideology. It's dead. So what are the other options? Option number 2, they started thinking about 5, 7, 8 years ago is, well, we're a Chinese society. We'll go back to Confucianism. And we'll start resurrecting Confucian philosophy and twist Confucianism to justify Chinese communism. As if, Confucian ideology legitimated the notion of an absolute emperor who was completely unaccountable to the people and as greedy and autocratic as the Chinese Communist Party has been. This isn't flying either. First of all, they're not in a very good position to renovate Confucianism. They've got, in a way, the meritocracy element of it. There is very meritocratic recruitment into the Communist Party and into the civil service, but that's not going to save them because that's not going to provide moral legitimacy for the overall system. And I think their effort to create a Confucian philosophy to justify communist rule has essentially failed to do that. So the third element of possible legitimacy for communist rule is the only one they've got now, and that's economic development. People support the Chinese Communist Party. They support Xi Jinping because the system has worked for them. It's increased their incomes. They've seen fantastic growth of the economy, of physical infrastructure, and that's all great. They've gotten rich until the last few weeks when the stock market started crashing. And the problem with this is it's perfectly useful in providing moral legitimacy for the regime as long as it goes on. And then when it stops, it's no longer useful. Because there's nothing deep about it. There's nothing intrinsic about it. There's nothing moral about it, really. It's just all a contractual bargain. We'll support the regime as long as you keep raising our incomes. And when that stops, what use are you, the regime, anymore? If that stops, they've got only one thing left. And it's always the last refuge of political scoundrels. And that is nationalism. Militaristic nationalism. They will make trouble with Japan. They are making trouble in the South China Sea. They're expanding the Chinese military. First of all, because they do have ambitions of regional hegemony. There's no question about it. All the countries in the region feel it, and all the countries in the region fear it. And second of all, they know that that's the only other thing they have to fall back on, to mobilize the people behind them, given that communism has failed, given that they've not been able to, communist ideology, they've not been able to persuade the Chinese people that they really are the embodiment of the Confucian ideal. Economic performance may not be reliable, so they've got to preserve and maybe stimulate and grow and manipulate these nationalist sentiments. For this reason, I think that the coming years, the coming 5, 10, 15 years, beginning really, I used to say, beginning in 5 or 10 years from now, but that was 5 or 10 years ago. Now I'm saying, beginning right now, we are in a very dangerous period. Because any time from now, going out 10 or 15 years from now, but quite possibly in the next 5, 7, 8 years, Chinese communism could collapse. Xi Jinping's rule could collapse.